Electric Jam Podcast.
Greetings and salutations, everyone. Welcome to the Electric Jam Podcast. I'm Christopher, and I'm here with Richard. If you don't know who we are, check out our website in the description of this podcast. Electric Jam has guitar reviews, gear testing, and tons of info on recording. Richard, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm always doing fantastic. Like I said, if I ever tell you I'm having a really, really, really bad day, you need to catch a ticket and come to Atlanta because something really bad has happened.
Something's going down.
Pretty positive, dude. So again, there's not a whole lot of news. The only news that we have for this entire week, and I don't know if you saw it or not, Schecter released Coal Chamber signature guitars.
Are they still around?
I thought they were gone. Like, I had no idea. I didn't even think they were around. So
everyone's kind of like, or they're all going to come out of the woodwork.
They're back in touring.
Because he was in Devil Driver, right? They were kind of, I never
right,
but
the singer.
You're gonna remember a guy with a tattooed chin. So I remember seeing pictures of him, and it's that guy from Coal Chamber.
Yeah. So the guitarist Meigs, he has. You're gonna love it too when you see it. He has a black burst baritone Telecaster.
Ooh, that does sound nice.
And it has a maple neck. It looks really traditional for what they do, but I think he used to play 7 strings, and it just makes sense that he's doing baritone now instead.
7-string guitar, but you're only playing 1 string. It's the culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what they did. They played the chords really low, and they weren't like Korn. You know, Korn used pretty much the entire neck because they would do like the effects and everything that sounded like record scratching and stuff that.
I remember being about 15, 16 when all this was kind of kicking off. And yeah, Coldplay, Coal Chamber were kind of like the poor man's Korn when they were sort of not as musically dynamic, not as interesting, not as heavy, not as good. But they were quite popular, though, weren't they?
Yeah, my brother had that album with the ice cream truck on it. And I remember listening to it, and every single song was kind of like the same song.
Yeah, there wasn't much dynamicism to it. It was a bit, some music I'd describe as quite flat, even though it's quite heavy. There's not really much going on to keep you interested for prolonged periods of time. And I remember thinking that when I was 16, so.
They did that cover of the Peter Gabriel song, Shock the Monkey, with Ozzy. And that kind of came out of nowhere.
Oh, yeah.
And that was actually really, really good. But
it'd have to be if
really
Ozzy was doing it. They probably had to get some ringers in.
Yeah, that's...
Because Ozzy's turning up. You go, we can't just, it's Ozzy. We have to be good. So get somebody else in. Get some session guys in.
We can't screw up today. Yeah, exactly. That was probably one of those albums that Josh Freese played on.
Yeah.
Because he's replaced so many drummers that he doesn't even remember what albums he's played on.
No way.
Just crazy. Yeah, I was watching his Rick Beato interview, and it was so good. I sent it to you, I think, last week. And, he talks about playing in the Foo Fighters and how it's a blessing and a curse, like, because his friend is dead. And that really sucks, but at the same time, he gets to be in the Foo Fighters. It's kind of a bittersweet thing. But yeah, he talks about he was the go-to guy in the early 2000s. Like, a new band would get signed, and they were like pop punk or emo or whatever. And everybody in the band had their stuff together except for the drummer because he can't play to a click. And so they would give the drummer one go. And if he couldn't do it, they would call in Josh Freese.
No way.
So he's on.
I didn't realize it was so mercenary.
He's on like 1,000 albums, and yeah, I told you that story. I kind of didn't run into him, but we were working in the same studio, and he was working on something I don't remember. It was the Katy Hudson, Katy Perry album that we were mixing. Yeah. She was Katie Hudson back then. She was doing Christian music. But yeah, he played drums on that too.
Right. So he's like the go-to session guy.
He really was, and he said he never wanted to be that guy, but he is. So
Oh well.
I guess that's how that happens. You just don't say no.
Well, it's
That's how
cool in
that
a way because you
happened
get
for
to
him.
play lots. I mean, as a drummer, it must be, I would say, probably. There's so many different styles. So if you're just playing the same style over and over again, like all the really good drummers, like Danny Carey and stuff, they all play in like really crazy varied bands, don't like jazz bands and big bands and stuff like that, just to keep it interesting. So I guess from his perspective, it's kind of good in a way because you can look back and be like, well, all these albums you played on, these bands you've played with, it's kind of cool in a way, rather than just being in one kind of big band. You can say, well, I've been in loads, and I was also in Coal Chamber.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the new Melvins album as well. That's news, and you heard it. I haven't even heard
Tarantula
it.
Heart. Yeah, it's out now.
Oh, is it out? Oh, Christ.
Yeah, it's out now. It came out 3 or 4 days ago now. But yeah,
okay. Well, I haven't listened to it, so you'll have to tell me. Is it good?
It is amazing.
Oh, good.
Oh my God, it's so good. And our article about it, I'll link it in the description. We got kind of an insider look on how they recorded it, and the way that Buzz described it is they pretty much just jammed and then turned it into songs afterwards. So like they had both the drummers and the bass player, and I guess they let them play. They recorded all of it, and then Buzz chopped all of that up and turned them into songs. And there's one track on there. It's like 20 minutes long,
Right.
but it doesn't feel like it at all. And then there's one track that I said in the review. It sounds like the Melvins, but the rest of the album absolutely does not. It sounds like something, I don't know, maybe Mr. Bungle a little bit.
I was going
Like
to say is because they have a tendency to either be really kind of weird or they play it straight. And that's kind of the thing with them. So you'll have listen to albums like Houdini, which are pretty much, just straight up rock and roll metal album.
Right.
And then you listen to, Basses Loaded and stuff, and they're a bit more experimental and weird and strange and don't have anything you would call like a single track. If I know they don't tend to do singles, they're not that kind of band, but you always have the kind of more kind of mainstream, not mainstream, but more what do you say? Just something that's
accessible.
A bit more like it's not accessible, but like it's got the hook, it's got the riff, it's more straightforward. Whereas they kind of just seem to chop and change. I mean, they've got so many albums and they sound different on loads of them, but I just love it when they're just, straight up like rock and roll metal, like just, big, because he writes such good riffs. That's the thing. When he gets going, there's no one else quite like him.
Yeah, the whole album is kind of like one song, actually.
Okay.
At least it was to me. When I was doing the review, I was listening to it and I just let it loop. And when it loops back around to that first song, you don't really notice. So that's why I said in the review, listen to it twice the first time that you ever listen to it. Because if you listen to it twice, it doesn't just feel like, 5 songs or 4 songs. It feels like, I don't know, about 10. Because the songs will go for a little while and then they'll change. Because of the nature of the way that they recorded it, it's like chopped up bits of just nonsense. And somehow Buzz threw it all together and made actual songs out of it. So it's really, really cool. Tarantula Heart, and it is out now.
They should have called it Naked Brunch.
Naked
Brunch. That's like William Burroughs wrote Naked Lunch, didn't he? It's all chopped up bits of a manuscript, and he kind of chunked it all together. And when he was writing it and doing lots of but he just
I was about to say he was on drugs.
But he just chop up his manuscripts and kind of piece them all together and stuff. So there you go. You missed out on a good title there.
Yeah, Naked Brunch. It could have been good. Brunch.
That'd have been a good name for a band as well. If anyone's listening, I can license it to you for a very small sum of money.
Yeah, only a few $100,000.
Yeah, and it's yours.
Speaking of bands,
yeah,
go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Nothing. I was just gonna say that I'd only charge them 10% fee on album sales.
Oh, what's the upfront fee? That's not
fair.
bad.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're a good guy.
No, I'm really looking forward to hearing it because Melvin's one of those bands that I really love, but at the same time, they've got some albums that I'm just kind of like, probably not going to listen to that again. So they kind of like, they swing hard and sometimes they miss, but usually they're pretty damn good. But when they're good, they're just ridiculous. And I've seen them live loads of times, and sometimes when they're live, they just kind of mess around. They don't even really play the songs properly. I saw them once and I was like, I just thought it's because I was drunk, and then I came out and one of my friends was like, they literally didn't play like one of their songs properly. It was just kind of just messing around, just riffing around within it, and then he chuck a riff in like you kind of recognize, and then stop, and then it's really hectic, very frenetic. But I'm looking forward to hearing the new one because it's hard, I guess. I mean, they're like, they've been doing it for as long as Metallica, pretty much, haven't they?
40 years.
At least they're trying something new. You wouldn't see like Lars Ulrich cutting up bits on the floor, being like, "Should we put this together this way and try this?"
Right.
Like, it doesn't matter which way you put it because the new album, it all sounds the same anyway. Because that's like one long track. That album, it's just like jigga 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 for like 70 minutes or however long it is.
Yeah. So it was a good segue before, but our main topic today is, do we even need real amps anymore? And it's a trend that I've been seeing a lot. I'm addicted to Premier Guitar's Rig Rundown. I love it. I can't stop watching it. I was watching the one for 311 yesterday because I'm a closet 311 fan. Like, you would never know that I love 311 as much as I do, but I do. And I was watching their Rig Rundown, and they still use real amps, both Nick and Tim in that band. They have a Mesa for the dirty sounds, and then they have, I think it's a Friedman for the clean, more reggae stuff.
Yeah. And
I don't know. You see a lot of bands like Metallica who have switched over completely now to AxeFX, and they've got everything in the AxeFX. Steve Vai has switched over to the Synergy amps, which are kind of like AxeFX, but not really. They're not digital. They're the analog version, but they all fit in a little rack case. And it's, I don't know, the size of a audio interface instead of being the size of an amp head. But I remember, back in the day, I went everywhere with a Mesa 4x12 and a Mesa dual rectifier. And that was my rig. And then for a while there, I had a Fender head also. So it was the Mesa for dirty and then Fender for clean. And I don't know, bands just really aren't doing that anymore.
Do you just think it's like a convenience thing? That it just sort of like, it's more convenient to...
Well, I see the appeal.
Perspective, to kind of just run a more straightforward, and you know, whenever you set up at night, it's going to sound the same. You don't have to worry about something going on the fritz or needing maintenance and stuff like that.
Well, I know that's why Metallica did it, because they do so many shows and so many different arenas, and the sound is always different. But what if, you could just make it the same every single night? And it's not like they use, 10,000 different sounds or anything. They probably have, 5 or 6 sounds?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's one of those things, isn't it? If you're a band like Metallica, your tours are just, they're huge,
massive
huge operations. It's a huge, like multi-million dollar operation. It's enormous. So I kind of get why, just in terms of keeping everything just flowing, as a functional thing, because the amount of gear they must have to move is insane. To have that huge stage, just cart it around, all the gear, the guitars, the crew. I mean, it's a lot. It's like a lot of stuff. So I guess they're kind of like just one less thing to worry about. I get that. But then I don't know. It's more from, for me, it's kind of more from like a recording thing. Because sometimes that's where you can kind of hear the difference quite a lot, I think.
Yes. That's exactly where I was going with this. So live, I don't think it really matters. And the bands that I saw that were still using amplifiers on Premier Guitar were legacy bands. You know, people that made millions of dollars in the 90s, like 311 and Dandy Warhols. They can kind of afford to take an amp along. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas,
and they probably got a guitar tech that's been with them since day one, and they're sort of like, well, you know, he knows what he's doing. He doesn't like this new stuff. Got him an iPhone and he never used it. That kind of thing.
Well, yeah, but, you know, they have the money to have those luxuries and to be able to have someone, like you said, there's someone in the back for 311, for example, and he's like a fifth, sixth member of the band, you know, because he's back there and he's doing all the switching.
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that totally. But I think it's like a luxury, but it's also a luxury kind of like a vintage classic car in that it's kind of temperamental. And, you know, you wouldn't want to be driving to Scotland in it in an emergency when you could have something that's super reliable and, you know, manufactured more recently and designed to be, you know, just work exactly the same every single time. And then I suppose there's the cost thing as well. So if you're like a kind of young up and coming band, it's probably a lot cheaper to do that kind of thing, to run. I mean, the obviously AxeFX isn't cheap to buy, but long term, when you factor in things like maintenance and logistics and even stuff like it, just, you know, huge things weighing down your van, which means more gas. It kind of all adds up, doesn't it? Depends how much of an accountant you want to be about it.
It really does. It really does. I mean, if you have an AxeFX like periphery, everybody has an AxeFX and everyone has a backup. Well, that's just a small rack case. And then they use whatever the venue has, you know, and that works.
It kind of makes sense in a way. It
really does.
It's genuinely like, but then also there's that rock aesthetic, isn't it? When you go to see a band, they've got like that mountain of amps behind them, like Sun. You ever go and see Sun? It's just like
oh yeah,
huge, just ridiculous this wall of amp, or like Sleep or High on Fire. So I think there's certain people,
Boris,
who would just never move away from that because they're just like, no, it's that's part of the whole aesthetic of the music, is just these huge cranked amps and that organic, earthy tone that you get out of them that might change from night to night. It might have a little bit more timbre one night and it might be a little more bassy the other night, but that's kind of part of the whole thing. It's part of the act, it's part of the show, and it's probably a lot of the reason why people go to hear the difference, because I've seen Sun quite a few times. I'm not the biggest fan of them, but I've seen them a few times at like shows and at festivals and stuff. And they sound completely different. Like I've seen them outside, I've seen them inside, I've seen them in a club, and every single time it sounds completely different. And the one where it sounded the most was in a club. Oh my god, it was like going to blow the roof off.
Oh yeah, they shake the room.
Ridiculous. It was just the floor was like vibrating. It was incredible. So
I was afraid the building was going to fall apart.
Yeah, it's like same with Sleep as well. They have a kind of, it's all about that tone, that guitar, that rumble, and you know, you might be able to replicate that with something like AxeFX, but it's that pushing air, that, you know, mechanical process of the signal, the guitar, the kind of humidity of the room, the pressure. That's what gives it that sort of unique sound. So while they're a dying breed, I don't think they'll be going anywhere too soon in that kind of circle.
You made a really good point. And when you said recording, I think that's kind of where it matters. And we've kind of mentioned this on and off. Like, I've tried a lot of amp sims when it comes to recording things, and I'm working on an album right now. I'm kind of working on two, actually, but I'm working on one that's going to be released under my own name. And I don't know, man. Like, it works for some songs, and for others, that millisecond delay, it just doesn't work. But then I don't have the Helix anymore, but I do have an old Pod HD, and I've been using that for clean tones, and it sounds amazing. But nothing sounds as good as the amplifier with the microphone in front of it, and the amplifier is cooking. It's hot. It's
physics.
Loud.
It's physics. That's the thing. It's real. It's physics. It's because it's so there's so many variables at play with it that can affect it, like the room, the position of the microphone, distance, the air quality outside, the air quality, everything. And it's a proper geeky thing, but I personally prefer to hear like an album that has imperfections to it. I don't like it when everything sounds too polished. I just think it sounds too clinical. That's why a lot of like new metal music, I'm kind of, when I listen to it, I'm just like, meh, it's not really doing anything for me, because it has this sort of, like, just, it's clean. There's just, everything's just clean. Even though it's heavy, it's just clean. There's just no kind of ambience that's present on records where they've recorded it using like tape or mic'd up guitar rigs. And that's like what Danny Carey was saying about with the drums. He always records the tape, and he always records it live, and he without a click track, and you're like, well, that makes sense, because when you listen to it, it sounds so much more organic, and it flows kind of like a Rush album, or like old school prog where it's kind of meandering around, or even like old jazz records, like really good ones where there's no one's keeping time. It's just kind of all over the place, but it has its own kind of rhythm to it that's not artificial. And that
absolutely.
And once you start moving more and more to digital stuff, you kind of lose that element of the music, and you lose a lot as well. I think personally, it just doesn't sound as good. And then you strap on top of that, everyone listens to music through Spotify, which is awful quality. So it's kind of like it's a really everything. Bad place to be in if you like music, particularly if you have like good headphones or a good stereo system, and you're streaming Spotify through it, which is why more and more people are buying vinyl again, I guess, because it just to get that sound.
And CDs. Yeah, totally. The new Taylor Swift CD apparently has sold hundreds of thousands of copies, which is weird. Yeah, and I mean, Fran, my girlfriend, who was on our last episode, she was in Target, and she said that she saw someone buying a Taylor Swift CD. And it's like, how weird is that? Like a kid buying a CD. That's... Yeah. But, I mean
we're of the age where CDs were a thing, so... But you go back...
Yeah.
But they haven't been for a long time.
And now they are, because people are starting to appreciate the physical media again. And it started with vinyl, and now it's kind of gone to CDs, and some bands even release stuff on cassette tape now, which is weird, but I think it's cool to have the option.
It is. And also I think there's a lot to be said that, because that's always been a thing for people like from our kind of age group. So if you grew up in like the 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, you were used to having things, which I'm not being like having stuff, you like a baller, but you buy a record, you buy a CD, you'd save up because you'd have to buy it if you're like 13 or something, and it was like an event getting it. It was like an important, and it had meaning to it because it was a physical thing. The artwork was important, and none of that, you don't get that anymore. That isn't a thing. And obviously we live in a everything's like geared towards nostalgia these days, and obviously the 90s is back in vogue with kids' dress and music, new metal coming back. So obviously some sensibilities from that era are going to come back too, which would be CDs. But actually, I think owning like a piece of something that's yours. Because if you have like iTunes or Spotify, it's not your music. You don't own it. You can't take it anywhere with you. If you haven't got the internet, you can't listen to it.
And it could be taken away at any time.
Exactly. They could just turn it off. And it's a very odd thing, but it's all about this idea now that you don't need to have like physically owning like products that you can just, everything's a subscription or everything's, it's everything's very commoditized now to the point where it kind of sucks in a way because you don't have anything and you have too much choice. So you never really watch anything. And then all that happens is you just have stuff foisted on you and forced on you. Like this is what's trending according to, some douchebag that does the TikTok or Instagram algorithm. Yeah, right. It's not a nice way. It's not a nice discovery method. It's not organic. It's not. It's programmed. It's going to get worse as well. It's going to get worse and worse because AI is going to become more prevalent. And yeah, it's just a mess.
I know I'm sorry. Right. I know you used to do this. You absolutely did this before. And I know I did it a million times. And I found some really cool stuff doing it. I would be in the record store and 9 times out of 10, I knew what I was going to buy. And it was an event, like you said, like my 15th birthday. I remember getting Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness by Smashing Pumpkins. Yeah. And I went home and I spent 2 days with that album and flipping through the book and just going through the songs. But sometimes you would go to the record store and you would buy a CD just because the cover was cool. I know exactly. You've done that.
That's literally the experience of buying something. Because you go, I've got some money left over, or it's 2 for 1. So you could buy one CD and you get another one for free. So you just look around. And I found some really, really, really like good albums just from doing that.
So
some really
did
bad
I.
ones too.
Same.
It's initially how I discovered Primus.
That's how I discovered Paradise Lost.
Yeah,
I saw Paradise Lost, and I was like the Milton book? Obviously, they're a goth band or something, maybe. And I listened to it, and I was like, oh, no, it's way more than that. And how cool, like what a cool way to discover things. But yeah, when it comes to the digital stuff, I see the need for it live. I
get the argument for it being live because it's live if you just want a consistent sound. You're touring, you're playing night after night after night. It makes sense. But I think in a studio, it's given the choice. I mean, if someone gave me the choice, I'd be like, of course I'm going to use an amp. Like, of course.
Right. If they were like,
hear that wall shaking when you're playing. You like that. You want to hear that, like that volume, because that's where the energy comes from a lot of the time. I think when you listen to like good records that are recorded, they didn't have to be tape, but just they're recorded well using live, mics.
Oh, and you don't even have to be in the room with it because most of the stuff that I've recorded, the amp was in another room. Yeah. So it was in a soundproof room or it was in an isolation cabinet with a microphone. And I'm sitting on the other side in the control room with a pair of headphones on, but it still felt different.
Yeah, you could feel it shaking the wall. But that's with Dope Smoker with Sleep. The whole album, there's a big thing about how they recorded that. And we've talked about this before, but the room that they recorded it in and the amps they used is basically like 80% of the sound. They wouldn't have got it if they tried to redo guitars another part in somewhere else, and it just didn't sound right because that room was special. It gave that room plus the amps, plus the elements and the ambience and the air pressure or whatever was specific to that place, gave it that sound, and that's huge. I mean, from a sound engineer perspective, that's big. And it'd be interesting to see what people like Steve Albini and stuff where they kind of stand on this, because he seems to be, and like Kurt Ballou, he's kind of very Steve Albini, I think, in the way he approaches his like music production and stuff. It sounds like organic, it sounds big, it sounds loud, there's lots of like energy and like to it. You listen to like anything he's done. I mean, the Russian Circles album he did is ridiculous. And the New Caven album, it just sounds massive.
I think he has the same kind of ethos that like you said, Steve Albini has. I think they're very similar when it comes to their production tactics. And yeah, you could see in the video for Caven's first single off of that new album, they're actually in his physical studio, and you can see them. You know, there's like a wall of amplifiers and
Yeah.
a wall of guitars.
It makes a difference though, but you listen
Fender
to
to
that.
Gibson, whatever.
We listened to that album, right? Or the Russian Circles one that was done by Kerr. And then you listen to the new Metallica album. I know I give that new Metallica album a lot of crap, but it's rubbish. It sounds rubbish. It sounds awful. It's the worst sounding Metallica album I've ever heard, and that's including Saint Anger.
Oh, wow.
It's so flat. You know, I remember I listened, I was so excited when it came out, and then I listened to it and I was like, this is the most boring sounding record I've ever heard. It's so flat. There's just nothing, there's no sonic.
I wonder if they used
Space.
AxeFX
It just sounds
on that
awful.
album.
It sounds so flat. There's no dynamic quality to it that it's not even exciting. And it's a new Metallica album. I remember sitting in the car, and my sister and my kid had gone into a shop, and I was like, ooh, because I had about half an hour. So I was like, oh, the new Metallica album, amazing. This is the perfect time to listen to it. And I put it on, and I was just, after about 10 minutes, I was like, oh, God, this is so boring. It's just, I mean, I know some people might, I'm not saying that someone might love it and think it's the best album they've ever done, but I just think, I don't know exactly how they did it, but to me, it's kind of a very strong indication of why sound engineer and music production is important when you're putting together a record. And the amount of money they would have spent on it compared to what Kurt Ballou would have spent, or the bands would have spent recording with Kurt Ballou, like Cave In or Russian Circles, is, orders of magnitude more.
Yeah.
They've
Russian Circle sounds like people playing in a room, and I know I say that all the time, but it sounds like three guys playing in a room. And that problem that you have with newer metal, I have that same problem, because it's gotten to the point now, it's kind of like auto-tune. Once you've heard it, you start hearing it and everything. Once you've heard drums snap to a grid perfectly, like right on the metronome without any give or take in the BPM.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Then you once you've heard that once or twice, and once you hone in on it, you hear it forever. And there's so many songs where I'm like, I think this is a really good song, but it could be better if it wasn't all just snapped like perfect.
Yeah, it's the snap
And the new
thing,
Metallica album sounded like that. So I wonder if they actually played everything, but then quantized it to where it was on the grid before James did his vocals. Because you're right, it sounds perfect, but it sounds very, like you said, it doesn't have any dynamics.
It's just flat.
Yeah, it just doesn't have very many dynamics.
Flat. And it's just, there's just no, there's nothing that stands out to me in it at all. Like, nothing, which is quite bad. Because I was when he's Metallica, Christ, they're like the biggest metal band ever. And when they drop a new album, and the last one, I didn't mind the one before. I thought it was quite good.
Hardwired. I thought it was
really good moments on it. It's very thrashy, and it sounded good. It sounded heavy. It was fast, and it had this like energy to it. And this other one was just like awful.
Well, the one before that, Death Magnetic, had a lot of good songs, but whoever mastered that album really screwed it up. I don't know if you've ever listened to it. Try listening to more than one song, and it will give you a headache. Like, the mastering is so bad. It sounds like everything's like very close to clipping. And that came out right around the Loudness Wars. That was right when all of that started, around 2008. So, I don't know, whoever mastered that album needs to be fired. Because there's really good songs on there. The Unforgiven 3 is a really good song. And it's ruined by the mastering. If you've never listened to it, definitely go and listen to it. And try to make it through more than 2 songs.
No, I do remember that album. I do, yeah.
Before that,
I know what you mean. It has some really good tracks on it too.
Yeah, no, the songs are great. It's just, the mastering is so in your face. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think amps aren't going anywhere. Everyone keeps saying that, tube amps and stuff like that, they're on their way out. And I don't think that they're going anywhere. I think that there's always going to be a place for them. And I think there's definitely convenience in having something like a Helix or an AxeFX on stage. But if you can, you're probably going to bring an amp.
Yeah. And I think also it would be, if you're like someone who's doing music now and you're writing music and you don't have like a ton of cash, it's great because you can put together and you can literally just use plugins on your computer and you can put together a really good sounding album. But if that was me and I was doing that, as soon as I could get my hands on some like actual gear, I'd be like 100%. That's what I'd be doing because I'd want that.
Oh
thing
yeah,
just to get you in the door. But a lot of bands do that, don't they? I mean, what was it Animals? Animals as leaders didn't have a drummer, did they, for their first album? They just all programmed.
Yeah,
and obviously
Misha
when they
from Periphery did it.
Yeah, and then when they got more established, they got themselves a drummer. So you just got to do what I think you got to do what it takes to get to where you need to be. But I think most people, even people who swear by, things like using plugins and stuff, or that using their computer predominantly, or who have only ever used their computer to play guitar, because there'd be plenty of people who were like that, who was like, I've never played through an amp, I always just played through my computer because it's easier, and it's kind of how they learn.
Or a multi-FX pedal. Yeah.
Yeah, it would still be like, yeah, someone gives you like, Adam Jones's guitar rig and you can just plug in and start playing through it. You're going to do that. You're going to be like, of course. Of course, pass me the guitar. Pass me the Gibson Les Paul.
Yeah, there's something about plugging into an amp that, I don't know, is so visceral. And like you said, it pushes air. That's the thing for me.
It's the push. It's like that hitting and then pushing. It's awesome. It's like nothing else quite like it.
Yeah, so I don't think amps are going anywhere. Not anytime soon. I think we'll probably continue to see like a dip in sales because it is kind of a luxury item. And really good amps, they're expensive.
Well, you basically need
$1,200.
You basically need like an actual room where you play guitar to have like a proper amp cabinet setup kind of going on with the pedal board because they're so loud and they're so big. So if you live in a flat or your apartment, you live in a house share, you're not just going to have like a little box room. And then in the corner, you've got, a amp stacked up, taking up, a third of your bedroom.
No.
So I get it like that. But I just think, given the choice, I would always, if opportunity to record some music, if you're like, well, we've got these Friedmans, I'd be like, okay, bring them out.
Yeah.
You're going to get on that, aren't you? Straight away.
Yeah, 110%. Like I said, even now, I record a lot with the mic in front of the speaker because I don't know. Even though,
didn't he? That's how they used to record guitars. They record these teeny little amps and they put it in almost like a coffin with a microphone in there. Close the door and crank it up really loud. And that's how Zeppelin recorded some of their guitar parts. I remember reading about that years ago. Was it Zeppelin or was it somebody else? Well, basically they'd use like a little 10-watt amp. But they crank it like all the way to the loudest possible setting, and they put it. Well,
there was no distortion pedal back then.
Yeah, and then they put it in a box, and then they put the microphone in the box with it, so it's just this self-contained distortion, like intense gain feedback.
Well, I have an isolation cabinet. It's a 1x12, and it has a little spot for you to stick the mic in, and then you close it up. And it's a self-contained box, and you could run a 50-watt amp through that thing, and
say goodbye to your distortion pedals.
Yeah, you could turn it up super, super loud, and you can hear it, but it's so muffled from the outside. But then you put on the headphones, and you hear what's coming out of the box, and you're like, oh, yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah,
so it's
cool.
kind of hard to go back once you've done it. Once you've recorded with real amps, it's kind of hard to go to anything else.
And there's a lot to be said for tinkering as well. Like you can mess around and you can change and augment the sound a lot when you're dealing with like a physical setup like that. Like little changes make a big difference.
Yeah, if you move the microphone just
A
2
little
inches
teeny bit,
over. Totally different sound. You don't even have to touch the amp settings. You can just move the microphone and then double track your guitars, and you get 2 totally different sounds.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So I don't think real amps are going anywhere. I think that plugins and I think multi-effects units, they have their place, and I think they're super convenient, and I understand why people use them, but I'm not one of those people that I'm in one camp or the other. And I don't think I ever could be. And I don't think anyone who's like actually professional would ever be in one camp or the other either. I mean, if I can use an amp, I'm going to. If I'm on a plane and all I have is a carry-on luggage, then yeah, I'm bringing a multi-effects unit.
Yeah,
you know?
Totally. Needs must.
Yep, absolutely. But anyways, I guess that will wrap us up for today, and we will see you next week.
Take care.
Bye.